Hello, everyone. Welcome to Zenin Fanfics. Today we are featuring What If Deku and Toga Had a Daughter? The story is written by Jojoflow on fanfiction.net. Before we start, please like and subscribe for more content. Now let's dive into the story. Izuku Midoriya pro-hero Deku had faced many terrifying things in his life. He had fought the League of Villains and defeated its leader Shigaraki, but none of that scared him as much as what sat before him. In the hospital crib sat an infant with messy blonde hair. This was his daughter, and for the longest time Izuku had wanted nothing more than to hold this little girl in his arms. That was until last month. Now he looked at the infant as if she was some terrifying predator ready to swallow him whole. Izuku stiffened as the baby began to move. Her arm slowly rose up to rub at her face as she began to wake. Her eyelids fluttered before opening to reveal a pair of golden orbs. Her baby face split with an unnatural grin before she spoke in a voice that couldn't belong to an infant. Izuku. Izuku shot up from his bed, barely holding back a yell as his chest heaved, swallowing huge gulps of air. His body glistened with sweat as he cupped his face, trying to shake off the intense fear he felt. "It's just a dream," he said, shaking his head slowly before throwing off his covers and getting out of bed. "I haven't had that nightmare in a long time," he said, wondering if it was caused by the appointment he had later today. Izuku went to the bathroom to do his morning routine and caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror. His green fluffy hair was cut short to make it more manageable in day-to-day life. He'd started wearing it this way after his breakup with Achiko. She'd liked his hair long and usually managed it for him, but those days were long gone. He shook his head, dispelling the painful nostalgia. Izuku's body was quite muscular, not as large as his idol and Minner's All Might, but no one could miss the rippling muscles every time he moved. Littering those muscles were multiple scars, a large one on his right bicep, another cross-shaped one on the left side of his torso, and finally another that arced across his abs. Each of these scars was a reminder of battles past in his ascent to become the #1 hero. Izuku wiped his face before leaving the bathroom and casting his eye to the lone room at the end of the hall. It belonged to his daughter Hinako, and judging by the light under the door, she was up as well. Izuku moved to the kitchen to get breakfast started for the both of them. As he did so, he took a deep breath. Today was going to be difficult. Recently, Hinako met her mother, and it went about as well as Izuku had expected, with old wounds being opened for him and new ones for Hinako. After that incident, Izuku and Hinako had talked and come to a decision to start going to a therapist. Izuku had a lot of baggage he hadn't dealt with in the wake of Himiko Toga, and Hinako needed someone to help her work her way through her past and come to terms with who she was. Their first session would be in a couple hours, and Izuku did not want anything to upset Hinako. "Dad, you're burning breakfast," Hinako shouted as Izuku looked down at the completely scorched eggs in the pan. "Damn it," he shouted, pulling the pan off the stove before tossing it in the sink. He clenched his fist and hissed through his teeth. "Damn it, damn it, damn it," he started shouting before feeling a hand on his shoulder. "Dad, calm down, it's just eggs. I don't know if you heard, but there's a lot more where they came from," she said lamely, trying to make him feel better. Izuku couldn't help but smile and scoff. "Yeah, I guess I didn't get the memo," he said as the two shared a nervous laugh. "How about we just have some toast? I don't have much of an appetite," he said as Hinako nodded. "Yeah, me neither. I don't want to go get my head shrunk on a full stomach," she said as Izuku turned to her with a worried look, only for Hinako to wave her hand. "Calm down, Dad, I still want to go," just some nervous sarcasm, she said, sitting down. As she sat down, Izuku looked at his daughter. Gone was the Jairu of the last few years. Her blonde hair was down, and her makeup was no longer there. He looked at her hands devoid of the garish fingernails. She looked so much prettier this way, but she also looked more like her mother as well. Izuku suppressed a shudder at that as he sat down 2 plates of toast. They both began to eat, slowly drinking in the silence of the morning, as both thought about what was going to happen today. After breakfast, the two Midoriyas relaxed in the living room, not really doing anything. The TV served as background noise more than entertainment, only separating to get dressed when it was close to their appointment time. Izuku got dressed in a simple t-shirt that stretched across his muscular frame and jeans sitting atop some well-worn sneakers. Hinako looked at her dad as she exited the house in a deep blue short shorts and a pink and blue striped t-shirt with bubblegum pink heels. Izuku looked down at his daughter as she looked at him before blushing. Look, I don't have a lot of regular clothes, all right. And before you say anything, don't you have a tighter shirt you can put on? I'm sure everybody wants to see your nipples. She fired as Izuku looked down at the shirt before shrugging. He supposed it was rather tight. Guess we both could use some clothes shopping, he said simply before stepping in front of her and kneeling down. Get on, he said as Hinako opened her mouth to protest, but only sighed in response. Call me crazy, but you'd think that the #1 hero would be able to afford a car, she said, wrapping her arms around his neck as he grabbed hold of her legs, as if giving her a piggyback. I'm going to die of embarrassment, she whined as Izuku lifted off the ground and began to fly through the air. Why would I want a car when I can fly? I'll never give this up, he said, smiling as the wind whipped through their hair. Hinako groaned at that. You sound like such a kid, she shouted over the wind as they soared to the therapist's office. Izuku and Hinako touched down in front of the therapist's office. Both took a deep breath before giving an awkward chuckle. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, Izuku said as Hinako gripped her father's hand. Hinako looked at the door as if it was the mouth of a ferocious beast. I don't want to, but we both need to, she said with a smile before elbowing her father in the side. Don't tell me the almighty Deku is scared of a little therapy, she said with a grin as Izuku smiled. It's not that I'm afraid, I just feel kind of silly coming here. I face all sorts of dangers and threats, and never needed this before, but now. Izuku trailed off as Hinako walked forward. This is my first time too, Dad, I'm glad we're doing this together, she said with a smile as the two walked hand in hand into the office. As they opened the door and felt the air conditioning grace their faces, they let their eyes adjust to the darker interior. The waiting room was empty as Izuku had requested the earliest appointment before anyone came and spotted him. This was a sensitive subject, and the last thing he needed was some fan crashing into this delicate situation. It was at times like this that Izuku wished he had an alternate form like All Might had. Izuku and Hinako walked towards the receptionist. Where the Midori is, he said to the receptionist. The young man looked up from his computer, and as his eyes landed on Izuku, he saw the spark of excitement in his eyes. Oh my God, I'm sorry about that. Yes, I'll let the doctor know. Please have a seat. Izuku smiled, glad that the young man could maintain such professionalism. Father and daughter sat down next to one another. As Izuku patted his legs, Hinako grabbed a random magazine and flicked through the pages, not really seeing or reading anything. It was just to keep her hands busy. The two didn't wait long before the door beside the reception desk opened. Mr. Midoriya, I am Dr. Nabe, and I would like to see you first, then your daughter. Follow me, please. The psychologist had deep purple hair and eyes that were solid green with no discernible pupil. Izuku followed after her, but not before giving Hinako's hand a light squeeze and a smile before disappearing behind the door. Izuku looked around the office. It was a comfortable size, and it fell in line with what most people would believe to be a generic therapist's office. There were several plaques on the wall and a plant in the corner. Against the wall that the door was on was a neutral beige couch, while across from it was a large armchair with a small table in between. Have a seat, Mr. Midoriya, or would you prefer to be called Deku or Izuku? Dr. Nabe asked. Izuku waved his hands. Oh no, Izuku is fine, he said as he sat down on the very comfortable couch. As Izuku settled in and looked back at her, he noticed she had also sat down and had a clipboard on her lap. Very well, then Izuku, just to get everything straight. You called my office to schedule an appointment to deal with some family issues with you and your daughter regarding her mother. Is that correct? Dr. Nabe asked as Izuku nodded. Yes, doctor, I received your number from fellow hero. He said you were the best. Izuku said with a cough. Dr. Nabe gave a neutral smile. Her monochromatic eyes gave nothing away. Thank you for that. Now, before we begin, I'd like to say that your session is completely confidential. Whatever you say here will not leave these four walls unless you give the okay. she said as Izuku nodded before a thought crossed his mind. Since Hinako, my daughter, and I have the same root cause of our issues, I'd like to say that if you need to, or if she asks, you can share things with her. I'm sure she has questions that she may not feel comfortable asking me, and if she did, I'm not sure I'd be able to answer them. Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head, disappointed in his lack of strength. Dr. Nabe nodded with a grateful smile. Thank you very much, Izuku. I'm glad you said that. I can see that you love and care about your daughter very much. Now you said that Hinako's mother is the cause of these problems, so why don't we start at the beginning? Tell me when you first met her, she said as Izuku took a deep breath. All right. Izuku bounced against Shoji's back as the taller boy carried him through the woods of the Pussycat's land. His body had finally given out on him after his fight with Muscular, leaving him a useless tag-along. He grit his teeth at his uselessness as he looked over Shoji's shoulder and saw them quickly approaching Achiko and Tsu with Todoroki, Tokoyami, and Bakuga trailing behind them. As they neared the girls, Izuku saw a pair of yellow eyes in the darkness of the forest staring directly at him. Hearing Achiko's voice, Izuku turned away from the yellow eyes in the forest to tell Tsu and Achiko the current plan. So we need to keep Kaken safe, he said, only for Tsu to ask. So where's Bakugu? She asked. Izuku looked at her as if she'd asked if the sun was a star. He's right, Bay Dash. Izuku turned to point out Bakugu, only to see both him and Tokoyami gone. Where are they? He shouted before a voice caught their collective attention. Well, it was a good effort, kids, but sadly not good enough, Mr. Compress said before jumping into the air as an iceberg obliterated the tree he'd been standing on. You've been a wonderful audience, he shouted as he leapt through the air. No, NOO, Izuku shouted as he squirmed free of Shoji's grip, trying to run after the compression villain, only to fall on his face with no strength left in his body to pursue him. Izuku, calm down. You can't go after him in your condition, shouted Achiko. Izuku shook his head. You're right, Achiko. I need your help, he said as he detailed a plan to have her use her gravity quirk on himself and Shoji, while Tsu used her tongue to launch them through the air after Mr. Compress. The gathered group looked at Izuku as if he'd lost his mind. You can't be serious. Midoriya, you can barely stand, and there's no way your arms can take a landing in their condition, Todoroki said as Achiko stood up and took off her button-up shirt, revealing her black muscle shirt underneath. He's right, we need to splint your arms before we do anything else, she said, tearing strips out of her shirt and grabbing sticks to use as splints. Achiko, are you serious? Look at the condition Izuku is in, Tsu said as Achiko continued her work. Either we do this the right, or Deku is just going to run off and get even more injured. At least if we do it this way, I know he's in the best condition given the circumstances, she said, tying off the strips tightly, making Izuku wince and hiss. I'm not happy about it, though, she said, standing up and glaring at Izuku. Izuku stood up and walked over to Shoji, who sighed and wrapped his arms around him. I'll keep him safe as best I can, Shoji said. We both will, Todoroki agreed, hopping onto the back of Shoji as Achiko activated her quirk on all three of them, watching them steadily rise into the air before Tsu wrapped her tongue around them and spun on her heel several times before launching the two into the air. As the boys hurtled through the air, they could make out the yellow jacket of Mr. Compress growing steadily bigger. Sensing something coming his way, Mr. Compress looked back as Midoriya, Shoji, and Todoroki slammed into him, driving him to the ground with Izuku standing on his back. Gimme Kaken, he shouted before being tackled and driven to the ground as a blonde girl sat on his chest. From where he lay, Izuku could clearly look up the girl's skirt, seeing a pair of truly innocent pink panties that clashed horribly with the blade raised above his head. The girl atop him had pale blonde hair with two messy buns on either side of her head. Her face was framed by two strands of her hair, drawing his eyes to her golden orbs glowing with manic obsession as her mouth was split by an obscene grin. Hello, Izuku, my name is Himiko Toga, and that was my first meeting with Himiko Toga, Izuku said, leaning back against the couch. He never knew how much of a burden he'd been carrying or how eager he was to talk to someone about this. He thought it would be hard to talk about anything regarding Toga, but once he started talking, it just all flowed out of him like a broken dam. The whole time Dr. Nabe had listened intently to his story, hardly moving at all, but now that he had finished, she was scribbling in her notebook. "So you met Toga while you were in high school, and she was a villain?" she asked as Izuku nodded. "And how many times after that did you two cross paths?" Dr. Nabe questioned as Izuku thought back. "I met her in my provisional license exam, though I didn't know it was her at the time. She had taken the form of a Shiketsu student at the time. I also met her during my internship with Naitai at the Overhaul incident. She'd attacked a pro hero and took on a shape after that. I can't recall meeting her again until she started playing as Achiko. That probably should have given me a warning, to be honest." Izuku hadn't seen Himiko at the final confrontation between him and Shigaraki, but knew she hadn't been captured. "I should have looked for her. I should have made sure she was locked up. Instead, I let myself become complacent, and that gave her the opportunity to seep into my life without me even noticing." He growled, clenching his hands into fists on his knees. "Izuku, I'm going to ask you to take a breath," Dr. Nabe said as she looked at Izuku. "Slowly inhale and exhale. You can't blame yourself for trying to have a life outside of your work. Everyone needs to be able to turn themselves off, and that only works in a safe environment surrounded by people who love you," Dr. Nabe said as she looked at her notes. "Now you said that Toga's quirk was transformation via ingesting BLD. Is that how she took over Achiko's place in your life?" she asked as Izuku nodded. "When I first met Toga, she could only take on a person's physical form, but Achiko told me that during the villain war, Toga's quirk had apparently evolved to the point where she could mimic a person's quirk as well. She was already good at mimicking a person, but after that there was almost no distinguishing her from the original." Dr. Nabe looked at Izuku, gauging his mental state before speaking. "If it's all right with you, Izuku, could you tell me the events that led up to your daughter's BRTH?" Izuku looked at Dr. Nabe before taking a deep breath. "I can." Izuku smiled as he held two large boxes on in each arm as he and Achiko stood in the living room of their apartment. He gave a smile before hearing Achiko give a squeal of excitement, floating off the ground to give him a kiss as she smiled that bubbly smile of hers. "I can't believe it. This is our home," she shouted happily as Izuku chuckled and set the boxes down. "Yup, this is our home," he said, looking at the spacious apartment. Achiko and Izuku were now 21, having graduated from UA several years prior. The two had been best friends when they started their first year, and over the next two, it blossomed into a truly loving relationship. All of their friends were happy for them, having seen the future couple coming from a mile away. The two had dated all throughout high school and continued to do so after graduating. Izuku had become a sidekick at Naitai's agency, which had been taken over by Mirio once he graduated from UA. It was inevitable, as Centipeder explained when handing over the position to Mirio. It was always Naitai's plan to have Mirio take over his agency when he either retired or died. Regrettably, it was the latter that necessitated Mirio taking the reins. Achiko, meanwhile, worked alongside Ryukyu and Nijire as her sidekicks. "I can't wait to invite Nijire over. You should invite Mirio over, we can have a date night," Achiko said, barely keeping herself from floating off again. Izuku nodded as he headed for the door. "That sounds nice, but let's get everything unpacked before we start making plans," Izuku said as Achiko gave an adorable pout. "Party pooper," she said as she followed him out to gather the other boxes. The two continued to carry their boxes and furniture into the house. Most of the stuff was gifts from friends or their parents congratulating them on getting their own place finally. Izuku and Achiko flopped onto the couch, looking at the myriad of boxes they'd have to unpack over the next few weeks. "Oh man, this is going to take a while," Izuku said as he began forming a plan on the most efficient way to unpack the place. But before he could stir up a mumble storm, his phone went off. Izuku fished his phone out and looked at it before standing up. "I'm getting called by Lemillion. There's a villain attack at the mall. I'll be home as soon as I can," he said, reaching into the suitcase by the door and grabbing his suit as he began to get changed. Achiko peeked around the corner, watching Izuku change, revealing that muscular frame of as one of the many reasons she fell in love with him. "Okay, see you when you get home," she said before blushing. When you get home. I sound like a housewife, she said as Izuku froze up at the mention of her being a wife. I mean, well, bye, he shouted, bolting out the door in flash of green lightning. So you ran without saying anything? Lemillion asked as he held one of the criminals to the ground, waiting on the officer to come over and cuff him. Izuku blushed and looked down as he held another criminal's hands behind his back. Yeah, I panicked. Okay, we just moved in, and well, it's not like I don't want to propose to her, but I don't know. It feels awkward that I didn't propose before we moved in together, and now it feels like it's too late, he said as he released his captive criminal into the authorities' custody and rubbed the back of his head. Mirio walked over, his blue eyes alight with mirth as he slung a hand over Izuku's shoulder. Just calm down, there's no rush. Proposing isn't just about her, it's about you too. Take your time, think it through, and when you feel the moment is right, go for it. I like to say that you've faced scarier things, but if it was a choice between facing down Chisaki again and proposing to Nijire, I can't honestly say I'd pick the latter, Mirio said in a rare show of vulnerability. Izuku looked up to Mirio like an older brother, so hearing him say something like that made him feel a little better about dragging his feet on this. Thanks, Mirio, that helps a lot, he said before remembering what Achiko said. Oh yeah, once our apartment is ready, how about you and Nijire come over? We could have a double date night or something, Izuku asked as Mirio. Of course, he said excitedly as he and Izuku bumped fists. Izuku touched down on the porch of their apartment and rolled his shoulders before reaching into his pocket, and his eyes went wide. Don't tell me I forgot Dash. Izuku went to facepalm as the door to the apartment opened, casting a warm light over him, and standing in the doorway was Achiko, leaning against the doorframe. She was wearing CRP top, leaving her toned stomach open and framing her melons beautifully. She wore light pink, but shorts and no shoes as she leaned against the doorframe. At that moment, Izuku was at a loss for words at the absolute goddess standing before him. Oh, Deku, is there a problem? She asked in a husky voice, and Izuku's throat went dry. Such a big hero coming here, there has to be a reason, she said, leaning forward, allowing her melons to jiggle and sway as she did so. Izuku's mouth flapped like a gasping fish as his mind spasmed, trying to come up with something, anything to say. Maybe you're here to save me from these tight, evil clothes, she said in a husky whisper, but to Izuku's mind it was like she was shouting inside his skull. Izuku hurried forward and grabbed her, lifting her into his arms. I am here, he shouted as he kicked the door shut to Achiko's laughter. Dr. Nabe adjusted her glasses. It seemed like you and Achiko had an appealing relationship. Izuku smiled sheepishly. Yeah, I love her, he whispered with a small smile, and it was still true. Izuku still loved Achiko. He didn't know if it was because there hadn't been any real closure in their relationship when it ended, or that it just didn't feel real. Even though he knew that their initial breakup was because of Toga, she'd played Achiko seamlessly that it felt like he never broke up with her. I should have seen it. There were so many things that were off, but I was just so happy to have her back that I didn't think anything about it. Dr. Nabe waved her hand. Izuku, we've talked about this. None of this was your fault, but before we get to the breakup, I think it's time I talk to Hinako, Dr. Nabe said, standing up as Izuku nodded. Of course, he said as he walked to the door and opened it. Hinako jolted as the door to the doctor's office opened and her father exited. She took a heavy swallow as she rose to her feet. Her father walked over and smiled at her as the doctor spoke. Hinako, if you would please come with me, she said, and Hinako froze up before feeling her dad give her shoulder a squeeze. It's okay, I promise, he said, looking her in her eyes, and she took a deep breath. Okay, Dad, she said, smiling before heading into the doctor's office, hearing the door shut behind her like a gunshot. Hinako sat down across from Dr. Nabe, slowly sinking into the couch as her eyes darted around the room. Dr. Nabe took a moment to look over Hinako. She could see a lot of Izuku in her, mostly in her mannerisms and personality. She could only attribute the blonde hair to her mother. It's okay, Hinako. I'm not going to bite, I promise. I'm just here to listen and hopefully help you move forward, Dr. Nabe said before giving her the same speech she gave Izuku, letting her know that nothing they said would be shared without her express permission, not even with her father. Hinako nodded at that, believing that Dr. Nabe would keep her confidence. Thanks, that makes me feel a little better about this. I guess I'm nervous because I don't really know what to say or how this therapy thing works, she said, leaning back against the couch. Dr. Nabe nodded. That's completely understandable, Hinako. Let's just start with what's on your mind right now, she said as Hinako bit her lip. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just tell me what you feel right now in this moment. Hinako looked up, her yellow eyes locking onto Dr. Nabe before she sighed. I'm nervous, confused, sad for my dad, she said as Dr. Nabe nodded. Good, let's start there. Why are you sad for your dad? You're showing empathy for him, which means you care about him, Dr. Nabe explained as Hinako scoffed. Of course I care about him, he's my dad, though that wasn't always the case. I was a real beach to him a while ago. I told him he didn't love me because he wouldn't let me see my mom. I was so stupid, he was just trying to protect me, and now he's here dealing with a bunch of SHD from the past, all because I was a stupid, selfish beach, she hissed, crossing her arms as tears built in her eyes. Dr. Nabe pushed a box of tissues across to Hinako, which the teen slowly took, dabbing at her eyes. They really are alike. She wears her heart on her sleeve, too, Dr. Nabe thought. Hinako, I can assure you that your dad doesn't blame you, and yes, you were selfish, but it was for the right reason. You may not have gotten the result you wanted or intended, but the motives behind your demands were pure. You wanted to meet your mother, the person who brought you into this world. That's a natural longing. I will say the methods you used were a bit extreme, but it was for an honest longing, Dr. Nabe explained as Hinako tossed the tissues away. Still, I hurt my dad. He's always thinking about me, and I just ignored his feelings. I want to make up for that, but now I have all these questions about myself and who I am. I mean, my mother is a freaking serial killer. Whatever brand of crazy she has is in me too. I've seen it and felt it. Am I going to turn out like her? Is my dad going to have to lock me up just for the safety of other people? I'm a monster just waiting to happen. Hinako began spiraling into a mutter storm like her father as darker and darker fears began piling up, threatening to drown her, until a clear and crisp smack resounded around the room. Hinako jumped, her manic mumbling coming to a screeching halt. She looked at the doctor, who'd slapped her pen against the table. I'm sorry if that startled you, but it was the only way to center you again. Now, Hinako, I understand you're worried about who your mother is affecting who you will become. That is unfortunate, but a rational conclusion. Dr. Nabe let her words settle in for a moment before speaking again. Our parents do have a large effect on how we choose to live our lives, though some of us choose not to admit that fact. My parents were both two of the most normal people you could meet, but that was only on the surface. My father fought daily against gambling addiction, and my mother had been abandoned by her parents, living in a foster home after foster home. They did everything in their power to live as normal a life as possible, sometimes going to drastic means to do so. This affected me in wanting to know what drove good people to do sometimes downright awful things. Dr. Nabe took a breath as she looked at Hinako. Your mother is a part of you, yes, but you get to decide how much that part will affect the person you are. After all, your father is a part of you, as well, a much bigger part, one would say. Your parents are just the foundation. Hinako, what you build on that foundation is up to you. All I'm here to do is make sure that foundation is stable, so you can build whatever you want on it, understand. Hinako took a moment to go over everything she just heard, and it made a lot of sense. I get to choose who I want to be, she said as Dr. Nabe nodded. Yes, now, will you help to strengthen your foundation? She asked as Hinako gave a smile. All right, Doc, let's do this, she said, sitting forward. Dr. Nabe smiled as she got comfortable. Izuku sat in the waiting room before hearing his phone go off. Deciding to get a breath of fresh air, Izuku walked out onto the sidewalk before flying high into the air. Hey Shoto, how's it going? He asked, addressing the ice fire hero. It's going well, but I should be asking you that. How is the appointment going? He asked as Izuku nodded. It's going well, I think. I do feel better. She's with Hinako right now. I hope this helps her, Izuku said, worried for his daughter as Shoto stayed quiet. For anyone else that would be awkward, but Izuku and Shoto had been friends for years, so he knew that whenever Shoto got quiet, he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how it would go over. Shoto, you can just say what you want. I won't get mad, he said as Shoto released a breath. If you say so, I was just going to say that you shouldn't worry about her so much. You're both dealing with a very difficult and painful situation. Make sure to think of your recovery as well. Izuku looked at the phone for a moment. You wouldn't know it by looking at him, but Shoto was a very caring person. He may not express it in the right way, but he cared deeply about those around him. Thanks, Shoto, I'll keep that in mind. I should probably head back inside, just in case Hinako needs me. Tell Yaoyorozu I said hi, he said as he began floating back down to the ground. I will goodbye, Shoto said before hanging up. Izuku touched down and walked back into the office. Seeing that Hinako wasn't present, he sat down to wait again. So, Hinako, you said you always fell off around your dad. Tell me what you mean exactly. Dr. Nabe asked. Hinako rubbed her head for a moment before thinking back to when she first felt like she didn't belong or that her dad was ashamed of her. Well, I think I really felt it when my dad had his class reunion. Now that I think back on it, I think he was just trying to keep people from making any connection between me and Toga. Dr. Nabe stopped writing as she noticed the pause. Hinako, not to get off track, but do you have a hard time not calling Himiko Toga your mother? She asked, which made Hinako clench her fist on her thigh. It's not a problem how you choose to see Toga. Is up to you, and whatever makes you comfortable is best. Dr. Nabe said as Hinako sighed. Whenever I think of her, the word mother pops into my head automatically, and I stomp it down. I don't want to think of that monster as my mother, but at the same time, she is. I want as much distance between me and her as possible, but the instinct to call her mother is still there. For so long I thought my dad just didn't want me to see my mother because he was a JRK. I had this whole romanticized image in my head that I and my mother were just a couple of free spirits that Dad couldn't control, and that's why she was gone. But now I know better, she said with a sigh, thinking of the psychotic look in Toga's eyes. I think I still have that longing in me, though, and I'm trying to fight against it. I don't know, maybe I'm just being dramatic, she said, slumping on the couch as Dr. Nabe took a few more notes. I know you may not want to hear this, Hinako, but from what I've read of your mother and what I've learned about you from this session, I can see similarities. Immediately, Hinako sat up, her yellow eyes tinging with red. What? I'm nothing like that monster, she shouted, glaring at Dr. Nabe, whose face remained placid. Hinako, please calm down. Dr. Nabe said as Hinako realized what she was doing and took a deep breath and calmed down. Sorry, she said simply as Dr. Nabe nodded. It's fine. Now, as I was saying, you and your mother are similar, but not in the ways you might think. For what I can see, you have your mother's free spirit. You march to the beat of your own drum, yes, but not to an extreme degree as she did. You also have a talent for reading people. The reason I think you got under your father's skin so well is that you understood what would hurt him the most, but you also have your father's empathy. Having that great ability to read people and your father's compassion, you can see and feel for others. That's something we could use more of in the world. As I said before, Hinako, you are not simply the sum of your parents' parts. You are your own unique person. Hinako thought about what she heard and found herself smiling. Thanks, Doc, Hinako said, feeling better. Dr. Nabe nodded. You are very welcome. Now, let's get back to the topic. You said you felt that your father was ashamed of you at his class reunion. Dr. Nabe recapped. Hinako nodded and sighed. Well, it started a few days before that. Dad had brought me to see Grandma. She was really the only other person I got to spend time with aside from Dad. I mean, people would visit us like Uncle Toshi, but for the most part, it was just me and Dad at home. He also didn't let me out much. It was school and home. Not to say I couldn't go outside, but he never let me leave the yard. He was really overprotective, but I always felt he was protecting everyone from me than the other way around. Hinako thought back to some of the things her dad would say to her when she was out playing with the other kids. Hinako, be careful. Hinako, don't hurt the other kids. Hinako, you have to control your temper. Things like that. It was never, Hinako, have fun, or Hinako, do your best. Hinako was around 5 years old as she wandered around the one-bedroom apartment. After her father moved out, apparently her grandmother had downsized, though from what she sometimes heard, her dad always offered to get her a bigger place. Izuku, do not spend your money getting me something. I don't need. This is more than enough for me and your father when he comes home on vacation. Inko Midoriya was a plump, aged woman. Her deep green hair had lightened with age, going to the color of ripe lime. She wore a loose, deep blue sweater and a long black skirt as she set out tea for herself, Izuku, and Hinako. "If you say so, Mom," Izuku said, sipping the tea. "Besides, if you want to spend money so bad, you should spend it on your daughter. Us girls need a lot to keep ourselves pretty, isn't that right, Hinako?" Inko said, winking at her granddaughter. Hinako smiled happily with a nod. "After all, you are taking her to your class reunion, aren't you?" Inko asked as Izuku sighed. "Mom, I'm not even sure I'm going, let alone taking Hinako. If I did go, I was hoping she could stay here with you." Izuku clarified as Inko looked at her son sternly. "Izuku, why on earth wouldn't you want to take your daughter with you? She's an adorable thing, and I'm sure all of your friends want to see how she's grown." Izuku was about to respond to his mother when Hinako placed her hand on her father's leg. "I can't go, Dad," she asked, her golden eyes large as dinner plates. Izuku sighed. "Okay, Hinako, I'll bring you," he said resignedly. "It felt bad, like he was looking for any excuse not to bring me with him," Hinako explained. "And then when we got to the reunion, I wasn't allowed to leave his side at all. I wasn't really upset about that. But what really made me feel like SHD was when I met Eri," Hinako said, remembering as she and her dad walked into the rented-out center for the reunion. She was dressed in a deep blue skirt and white shirt with black shoes, as her father came in something akin to business casual. He wore a long-sleeve green button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up to show his rugged forearms. Izuku wore black slacks with green and white tennis shoes. "All right, Hinako, don't leave my eyesight, okay? I want you close by, understand?" Izuku explained as an excited Hinako nodded happily. This was the first time she was going to be able to meet so many new people. "Okay, Dad," she said as the two walked inside and saw all the other people inside. At her father's entrance, there were several shouts of greeting. "Midoriya, glad you could make it, man," shouted Kirishima as the two exchanged a fist bump and bro hug. "How you been, bro?" Kirishima asked before looking down at Hinako. "Oh, right, you're dad now. Didn't think you'd be the first one to have a kid." "Hey, I'm Kirishima. I'm a friend of your dad's," he said, smiling at Hinako, who walked over to the man with no fear and patted his leg. "I'm Hinako Midoriya. I'm 4 years old. Nice to meet you," she said with a grin as Kirishima smiled back. "Nice to meet you, too, little lady. Sweet kid, you got Midoriya," Kirishima replied as Izuku placed a hand on Hinako's shoulder, pulling her back some. "Yep, that's my daughter," he said as they followed after Kirishima to meet with the others. Hinako was at her dad's side as he mingled with his old friend, though she did want to go and meet with the other kid around. As she contemplated doing that, a feminine voice yelled out, "Deku!" Izuku turned around as a silver-haired teenager slammed into him. Izuku's face split into a smile as he hugged the girl. "Eri, it's so good to see you," Izuku exclaimed as he petted her head, laughing with joy. Eri was up to the bottom of Izuku's chest. Her silver hair was held back by a headband. She was dressed in jeans and a red t-shirt matching her red sneakers, reminding Hinako of her father's trademark shoes. The two chatted as easily as if they had just seen one another. Hinako looked at the two of them and felt her chest tighten as she continued to watch them. It was like Eri was his daughter. He was talking with her more easily than he ever talked to me. It hurt really bad. I wound up starting to cry, and my dad picked me up before excusing the both of us. We left and didn't come back. I felt bad for ruining the party, but at the same time, I was glad that it was just us. I don't know, I was all over the place. Seeing him talking with Eri like that just sucked. Hinako explained as best she could. Dr. Nabe nodded. "I see, that would be hurtful. Seeing your father interact with people more easily than you, his own daughter. I'm sure your father didn't mean it that way, but that was how you took it, which is what mattered at the moment. Thank you for sharing that with me, Hinako. Now I think we should stop there for now, but I look forward to meeting again with you next week." Hinako cast her eye to a nearby clock and saw that she'd been in here for longer than it had felt to her. "Yeah, better head out for today. I don't want my head to get too small," she joked as she stood up and headed for the door. Dr. Nabe smiled politely as the two exited the door, seeing Izuku stand up as they did so. Hinako moved quickly to give her father a hug, who eagerly returned it before looking at Dr. Nabe. Well, I would call that a successful session. I look forward to speaking with you two again next week, she said as Izuku moved to shake her hand. Yes, we'll be there. Thank you so much, Doctor, Izuku said as he looked at Hinako, who nodded. Yeah, thanks, Document, she said as the two left. Izuku looked at Hinako. So did you still feel like shopping? He asked as Hinako bounced her head from side to side before nodding. Yeah, we should still do that. We both need a change to our wardrobe, she said as Izuku knelt down only for Hinako to stamp her foot. No, call a cab, or something. I don't want to fly, she said, crossing her arms annoyed as Izuku tilted his head to the side before adopting a knowing grin. Hinako, you're not afraid of heights, are you? He asked as Hinako blushed. No, I'm not. I'm just saying we should take a cab or something, she groused as Izuku gave a quiet chuckle. Fine, I'll call a cab, he said, pulling out his phone. Dr. Nabe looked out her window at the now-set sun and stretched, hearing a few pops as she did so. Time to head home, she said, shutting down her computer before gathering her notes and files to lock them into her filing cabinet. Even after several appointments, the Midoriyas were still on her mind. She knew she wasn't the first or only therapist to speak about a hero-villain pairing. It happened more often than people might think, but this one was highly complicated. As Dr. Nabe reached to turn the lamp off on her desk, her cell phone rang. She took it out of her purse and looked at the caller's ID before answering. I was wondering when you were going to call. There was silence on the phone before Shoto Todoroki responded. Am I that predictable? He asked as Nabe shook her head. It's not about being predictable, Shoto. It's that you just care that much. It's a good thing, and I know what you want, and without going into too much detail, I think I can help your friend and his daughter. Shoto breathed a sigh of relief as he stood up in his office. Shoto cut an imposing figure much like his father. Though her endeavor had been built like a fighter, Shoto was lean, seeing as he focused on mid to long-range combat. I suppose I should thank you for recommending me to him, Dr. Nabe said as Shoto shrugged. You're good at what you do, and I trust you, Shoto stated plainly as Dr. Nabe laughed. Thank you for the vote of confidence. I mean it, Shoto. I'll take care of your friend, don't worry, she said as Shoto nodded. If there's anything I can do to help, I will. I owe Izuku a debt that I can probably never repay, he said as an idea popped into Dr. Nabe's head. It was dangerous and probably unprofessional, but she felt in her gut that this would help her to help her patients. Well, since you offered, there's something I want to ask you, she said before taking a deep breath. Do you think you can get me in to see Himiko Toga? She asked. Todoroki went silent on the phone at Dr. Nabe's request. It took him a moment to comprehend what Dr. Nabe was asking him, and after that moment passed, he spent another questioning her sanity. Are you serious? He asked, his voice completely flat as he did so. Dr. Nabe gave a small sigh of relief. He hadn't given her a rejection outright, so maybe he was open to the idea. I'm Shoto. Toga is the epicenter of this whole mess. I can get Izuku's side of the story, but that's only half of it. I need to speak with Toga, preferably face-to-face, but I can settle for a phone session, even if that will make things more difficult. Truthfully, Dr. Nabe didn't even want to entertain the thought of an over-the-phone session. They weren't as effective, in her opinion. She wanted to be face-to-face with Toga to truly get a grasp of the woman who could throw such a catastrophe into people's lives. Shoto sighed at her answer before thinking very carefully. His immediate reaction was to tell her no, but at the same time he knew Dr. Nabe. He'd been going to her for years and knew she could help Izuku and his daughter as she'd helped him and his family. If she was asking for this, then it had to be necessary. I will see what I can do. That's all I can say right now, Shoto answered. Once more, Dr. Nabe sighed in relief. Thank you, Shoto. I'll wait for your answer, she said before the two bid one another goodbye. Izuku got out of the cab and held the door open for Hinako as they stood in front of the mall. He looked at his daughter as she gave a sigh, getting out of the cab with a smile as Izuku paid the cab fare and also signed a receipt for the man. Well, thank you so much, Deku, sir. My kid is going to flip when I tell her this. She's your biggest fan, he said as Izuku waved to the man. Glad I could help, and thanks for the ride, he said as the cab pulled away. He turned around to see Hinako, smirking at him. What? He asked as they began to enter the mall. Nothing, it's just, I think this is the first time that I've seen you do the whole hero meet and greet thing. I always knew you were a big deal, but seeing that just now kind of makes it feel real. She said as Izuku blushed and shrugged. I guess you're right. He said as they entered the mall. Let's go get your clothes first. He said as Hinako nodded. Sound good. She said, not really sure how to act with her dad. They've been putting in a conscious effort to spend more time with one another and learn how to interact, but it still felt weird. For so long, both of them have been doing their own thing. Sure, her dad checked in on her and got her out of any trouble she might be trying to start, but spending an afternoon at the mall. That's the furthest thing from their past interactions as they could get. The mall was chock full of people, which seemed to be its constant state. Hinako remembered coming here in her bad girl phase and flirting with guys who obviously had girlfriends with them, or stealing trinkets from here and there. She frowned thinking back on those actions and feeling the crushing weight of guilt crash over her. Izuku looked over at his daughter, seeing her frown, and instantly started worrying. Is something wrong? Is she not having fun? What should I do? Should we have gone to get my clothes first? Oh, maybe we should have gone to a department store and not a mall. Idiot. I should have asked her what store she wanted to go to. This is all my fault. Stupid. Izuku began to sink deeper and deeper into his own worries before hearing Hinako's voice. Dad, you're mumbling, Hinako said, getting his attention and pulling his attention to the here and now. Izuku looked up at Hinako and rubbed his head. Sorry, Hinako. I thought you might not be enjoying yourself, so I was wondering what I could do to change that. I'm sorry, I should have just asked you instead of trying to fix everything on my own. Communication is key. He repeated to himself more than her. Hinako shook her head. It's nothing you did, Dad, and in the spirit of communication, I should just tell you. I used to come to the mall a lot and cause trouble. Nothing too crazy, just flirting with couples to cause a scene or some shoplifting. She said, her voice dropping drastically at the mention of her petty theft. Izuku felt himself stiffen at the mention of her stealing and took a breath, realizing scolding her for something she already knew was wrong wasn't going to help. I'm glad you told me this, Hinako, and I trust you know that was wrong. He asked, already knowing the answer, as Hinako nodded. Yeah, Dad, I'm really sorry about that, she said before feeling her father's hand on her head, patting it lightly. The past is past, Hinako. As long as you've learned from it, there's nothing more that needs to talk about, Izuku said, smiling as Hinako blushed at her father petting her head. Until this moment, she never realized how much she wanted this. Well, maybe somewhere in her subconscious she did. To think this simple show of affection could make her feel so happy. Maybe all those otaku had it right. She thought. Oh, look, we're here, Izuku said, pointing at the women's clothing store and walking towards it. Feeling her father's hand leave her head left her a lot less warm inside than she would like to admit, but she'd survive. Hinako entered the store and began wandering the shelves as her father stood to the side, not wanting to crowd her as she chose her clothes. As she wandered the aisles, Izuku looked out the window of the shop, watching the people go about their day. It had been some time since he'd taken a leisure day like this. Not since Hinako was an infant, and even then he couldn't call those leisurely. Izuku stood in the baby section of the supermarket with Hinako in one hand wriggling like a worm as he supported a package of diapers in one hand and a different brand with black WHB. He looked between the two brands, completely stupefied. They're both for her age range, but do I go with super absorbent or comfort fit? He said with a sigh as he adjusted the diapers to try to get to his phone while also keeping Hinako fully supported. He decided to call the one female in his life that would know the answer to this question, but of course, with his luck, his mother didn't answer. Oh, come on, he shouted before realizing where he was and immediately quieted down. Still, his shout was loud enough to startle his infant daughter, who immediately started crying. Oh, Hinako, I'm sorry, so sorry. Please forgive Daddy, he said, bouncing the little girl as he cooed to her, trying anything to get her to stop crying. This was all too much. Izuku felt his eyes burn as he started to cry as well. It didn't help he wore his heart on his sleeve. Even now, as an adult, it didn't take much to get his waterworks going. As Izuku silently cried, he felt a small hand touch his cheek. He popped his eyes open to stare at Hinako. This small infant was comforting him, a grown man. He shook his head and wiped his face. God, I'm pathetic, he said, standing up straight. I gotta do better. Let's just get both, he said with a weak smile as he kissed Hinako on the forehead. Dad. Izuku jolted from his memory as he turned around to see Hinako waving him over to the dressing room. I've been calling you for like 5 minutes, she said before looking at him. Dad, were you crying? She said as the irritation left her voice replaced by concern. Izuku blinked his eyes several times to try and keep any tears from falling. No, of course, not one of the free sample perfume ladies caught me by surprise, he said, shaking his head. What's up, Hinako? He asked as Hinako eyed him, not buying his perfume story for 1 second, but decided to let it slide. I just wanted to see what you thought of this. I've had my gal taste for so long, I don't really know how to pick out normal clothes. Does this look normal to you? She asked. Hinako was wearing a pair of green shorts that went down a mid-calf above. It was a plain white t-shirt with the word classic scrawled across it. Izuku looked it over and nodded. Seems good to me, Hinako. Honestly, I think you could go with something cuter. It is summer, maybe you should try a few dresses, he said with smiling awkwardly. Though I don't really understand fashion, least of all girl fashion, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask, he said before an alarm started to sound through the mall as an automated message played. Attention customers, this is a villain attack alert. Please evacuate the mall immediately in an orderly fashion. This is not a drill. Repeat, there is a villain attack in progress. Please evacuate. Izuku looked to Hinako. Hinako, leave the store and get somewhere safe. I'll find you afterward, Izuku said before green lightning arced around him and he rushed out of the store and vaulted over the railing while using float to get a bird's eye view. Izuku's eyes raced across the mall before spotting the villain in question. It was a large heteromorphic villain with large horns jutting forth from his forehead and spines running down his back. At first glance, Izuku likened him to an anthropomorphic triceratops. The man slammed his hands into the ground and ripped a chunk of the flooring free before hurling it towards a Foot Locker store. You think you could just fire me over a few dollars missing? F you, he shouted. Izuku activated his black WHB to catch the boulder before spinning in the air and hurling it back at the villain, slamming the boulder into him, sending him flying back into one of the supporting pillars for the second floor. With a dash. The dinosaur-like villain stood up from the partially destroyed pillar and looked up to see Deku floating down to the ground in front of him. Please stop this. This is not the way to handle being fired. Calm down and surrender before you hurt someone, Izuku said gently but firmly as he stared down at the perpetrator. The villain looked at him and growled. Yeah, F that, he shouted before slamming his fist into the pillar, destroying it completely. Izuku's eyes widened as cracks spread through the second floor as people continued to evacuate. No, he shouted, leaping towards the pillar and using black WHB to hold and support the walkway and give the evacuees a stable path to walk on. As he did, so the criminal rushed towards him with his horns down, ready to gore Deku. If I'm going to jail anyway, might as well go as the man who killed the #1 hero. From her vantage point, Hinako's eyes widened as the villain rushed towards her dad. Unbidden and almost subconsciously, she heard herself yell out, "Dad!" Deku readied himself for the impact, but at the last second, something crashed into the side of the charging villain's face, shattering one of his horns. Izuku's eyes widened as he saw the rainy day. Hero Froppy kick off the villain's face, sending him flying and skidding across the ground until he came to a stop against the wall. Izuku looked at Tsu Ajui as she spoke to him. Hey, Deku, it's been a while, Kero. Izuku gave an awkward smile before speaking. Why yet, Tsu? It's been a long time. H, how are you? He asked as Tsu's poker face remained seemingly unchanged before looking from Izuku to the second floor walkway he was supporting with his black WHB. Let's save our chat for after the rescue team comes, she said as Izuku nodded. Yeah, you're right. He said the two heroes waited for the repair team and officers to take away the perpetrator and begin repairs on the walkway to relieve Deku of his burden. Izuku rolled his shoulders a couple of times as he walked away with Tsu. So how have you been? Izuku asked as Tsu held a finger to her chin. Well, I've transferred from Ryukyu's agency over to Selki's, but that happened a few months ago. I was off today, and a friend and I decided to do some shopping. She said before looking at Izuku. What about you, Izuku? How have you been? She asked as Izuku scratched his head. Yeah, I've been good, yeah, good. Well, I'm in a better place, he said with a nod. He was better, at least he thought so, from the person he had been a few months ago. First with him telling Hinako the truth about her mom, and then meeting with Himiko, and then their first therapy session. He didn't want to pat himself on the back too much, but Izuku thought that they had both come a long way. Ochiko might be happy to hear that. In an instant, Tsu had brought Izuku crashing down at the mention of her name. He felt severe pain in his chest as he thought about Ochiko. With all the progress he'd made, he'd forgotten the worst mistake of his life. He'd forgotten the one person he probably hurt more than anyone else. Izuku clutched his chest as his breath came out in ragged puffs of air. Tsu looked over after hearing the labored breathing, and her eyes widened at Izuku's reaction to hearing Ochiko's name. Now, Tsu knew that the breakup between the two of them hadn't been pretty. In fact, from the way Ochiko the day it had happened, Tsu thought Izuku might have killed her parents or something. Of course, Ochiko hadn't gone into detail about exactly what happened, but she knew that it had to do with Izuku being a father. Whatever the circumstances or the whole situation had left a deep scar on Ochiko. Tsu immediately felt a stab of guilt in her chest at being so inconsiderate. She'd taken into account Ochiko's feelings because she was right in front of her eyes, but she hadn't really thought about how Izuku felt about the breakup. Izuku, I'm dash. Before Tsu could apologize, a blonde girl ran up to Izuku. Dad, are you okay? She asked, seeing her father with a pained look on his face and clutching his chest. Did you get hurt or something? She asked, inspecting Izuku all over to find the source of her father's pain. Izuku noticed the pained look on Hinako's face as she desperately tried to help him. I'm fine, Hinako. Just lost my breath there for a minute, he said, standing as tall as he could to try to show a brave front. I'm good now, thanks to Tsu here, he said, pointing to Tsu, whose blank face gave nothing away. But Izuku knew from years of being around Tsu that she wasn't buying his brave face and could tell that something was wrong. He just hoped she didn't bring it up in front of Hinako. Tsu, for her part, stayed silent. She felt bad that her mentioning Ochiko had sent Izuku into a panic attack. Me and my big mouth, she thought to herself before Hinako looked directly at her yellow eyes meeting with Tsu's black ones. After a moment of inspection, Hinako bowed. Thanks for saving my dad, she said with the utmost gratitude. Tsu raised her hands. Oh no, it was nothing besides Izuku's over-exaggerating. He would have had it under control. Izuku's always been good at thinking on his feet, Tsu said as Izuku looked to the side with a blush. The truth was his plan was to let the villain hit him and hopefully deliver a strong kick while still holding onto the walkway. Not the best plan, but all he had at the time. Anyway, I should get going, Izuku. It was nice seeing you. We should catch up sometime. I think I still have your number on my phone, she said, placing a finger to her chin, remembering if she did in fact have Izuku's number. Well, let me see if I have yours, he said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through the contacts to see Tsu's name right under Ochiko's. He'd completely forgotten that her number was still in there. The multiple times he'd transferred his data to new phones after upgrading or just breaking his other ones, and he still had her number, though it probably wasn't her number anymore. Good, we'll set something up when we're both free, Tsu said before nodding to Hinako. Nice to meet you, Hinako, she said before walking away. Hinako watched Tsu go and cast an eye at her father, seeing him watching as well. Not that she could blame him. Tsu was a slender beauty with long legs and a small waist. Her long green hair was done into a quick ponytail, no doubt in preparation for fighting that villain. Her outfit accentuated all her best features. Her deep green leggings showed off those long legs and the toned but of hers. The shirt she wore was a little too big, no doubt allowing her father, being taller than her, to look down and catch some cleavage if he was that kind of guy. She's really pretty, Dad, an old girlfriend, she asked with a Cheshire grin. Izuku's face went a heavy pink as he blushed. What? No, of course not. She was my classmate in high school and a really good friend, that's all, Izuku said, shaking his head. Come on, let's go home and eat. I think we've both had enough excitement and drama for the day, he said, grabbing hold of Hinako and throwing her on his back before she could reject the prospect of flying and leaped into the air. Sue turned around in time to see Izuku sputtering at something Hinako said before snatching her up and leaping into the air. She couldn't help but give a soft giggle at that, remembering how often Izuku would just go off on a patented mutterstorm. Are you sure you didn't want to see him again? He seems to be happy, she said, turning to her best friend, Achiko Uraraka. The brown-haired woman had said hair tied back into a ponytail and was dressed in a pink t-shirt and jeans with boots on her feet. She shook her head at Sue's question. I'm sure. Things ended badly for us, like really badly, Sue. He may have recovered, but I haven't, and I'm not sure I ever will. I can't see him and his daughter, she said, clenching her fist. Sue looked at Achiko and turned to her fully. Hinako seemed really nice. I can't speak for her fashion sense, but she didn't seem like a bad girl, Achiko. I'm not going to pressure you or anything, Achiko. Do what you think is best for you, but I don't think you'll ever recover if you don't at least talk to Izuku, she said, placing a hand on Achiko's shoulder. Or you could always talk to me, Karo. We're best friends after all, she said with a small smile. Achiko looked at Sue and nodded. I guess it's time you knew, Sue. I've kept it a secret for so long. Not here, though. Come over to my place, and I'll tell you about me, Izuku, and Himiko Toga. At the mention of the BLD drinking villain, Sue's poker face broke, and her eyes widened as her jaw dropped open. Sue followed after Achiko as the young heroine walked up to her front door and unlocked it. Achiko, even though she was in the top 20 heroes, lived in a very modest home. A surplus of money couldn't change her thrifty nature. Sue looked around, having been here several times. Her eyes immediately went to her favorite decor pieces. There was a stone frog by the door that Sue couldn't resist giving it a small pet like she did every time she visited. Her next favorite was a picture of herself, Nijire, Achiko, and Ryukyu after she and Achiko had graduated and officially joined Ryukyu's agency as licensed heroes. She smiled at the photo, especially since she remembered that Izuku had been the one to take it. That was a good day, Sue said absent-mindedly, not really expecting a response. Achiko looked at the picture, as well as she came out of the kitchen with 2 teacups, one brown, with a bare face on it, with 2 handles on either side that looked like a pair of ears. The other teacup was green, with Kermit the Frog on it, which she handed to Sue. Yeah, it was. Nijire was so happy we joined her agency, she kept bursting into tears, Achiko said as she sat down, giving off a small giggle. I should really call her. See how she, Mirio, and their son are doing, she said before sighing. Sue let Achiko breathe for a moment, letting Achiko take this at her own pace. Sue sat down, sipping her tea slowly before hearing Achiko's voice. Everything was going so well at first. We moved in together and were both living our dreams. Izuku working with Mirio, and me working with Ryukyu and all of you. Achiko trailed off, going silent, giving Sue the impression that she may have been rethinking telling her this. But eventually Achiko pushed past her discomfort and spoke again. Then things started going wrong, little stuff at first. Him sending weird messages. Things like, were those CC black panties? Or thanks for last night. I always thought it was for me and never really asked about it. But then things started to escalate. Achiko looked at Izuku as they both stared at the TV and what was playing. Izuku, did you order pawn? Achiko asked, more surprised than anything else. Izuku's face went beet red as he hurried to deny the question. Oh, of course, and not Achiko. I wouldn't need some thing like this, he hurriedly explained. Achiko looked at him for a moment before giving a forgiving smile. Achiko and Izuku had come down this morning, having just woken up and eager to spend the day vegging out together. But when they turned on the TV, there was a blonde woman being passionately penetrated by a man. They had both stared at it in shock before Achiko asked Izuku if he'd ordered it. I'm not judging you, Izuku. I know that our schedules don't line up sometimes, and we all need to relieve some stress. There's no reason to lie about it, she said with a shrug. It really wasn't that big a deal to her. Sure, she wished he would have ordered something that reminded him of her and not a blonde getting did in binge, but maybe he was just scratching a random itch. Izuku seemingly deflated at Achiko's words. Achiko, I didn't order this, I swear. I wouldn't lie about something like this, he said, looking at her with disappointment. She sighed, not wanting to argue about it. Okay, Izuku, I believe you, she said, and dropped the issue. It really didn't matter. Days passed, and the incident was forgotten. The couple moved beyond it and kept living their lives. It was at this point the next inciting incident came about. Achiko lay sleeping next to Izuku as a ray of sunlight peeked through the curtains, lancing right through her eyelid to wake her up. She yawned and rubbed her eyes to remove the sleep from them. Achiko sat up and looked down at the still sleeping Izuku. She looked down at his sleeping face and smiled gently. He looked so relaxed she couldn't resist touching him. She ran her hand gently through his naturally fluffy green hair before cupping the side of his face, and then traced out a couple of patterns in the freckles on his face. She watched as Izuku smiled, giving a sleepy giggle. Achiko felt her chest tighten at the cuteness she'd just been shot with. God, how can you be so adorable? She asked before forcing herself to get out of bed. If she stayed any longer, the gentle petting she'd been giving him would grow a lot heavier. And as good as morning SEC sounded, Izuku needed his rest. Achiko got dressed in her pink paw print robe and headed out to get the mail. The morning was crisp and cool, with a gentle breeze blowing. Achiko took a deep breath, inhaling the very breath of fall. After releasing her breath slowly, she walked to the mailbox and retrieved the letters inside. As she walked back to the house, she cycled through the envelopes. Bill, junk mail, fan letter. Achiko shut the door behind her and looked at the fan letter. It was odd, as the only thing written on it was Izuku's name in deep green and encircled by yellow hearts. There was no stamp on it, nor was there a DLVRY or return address, which would mean someone came and personally placed this in their mailbox. That's odd, she said as she looked towards the bedroom, finding and hearing Izuku still sleeping. I really shouldn't, but this is way too suspicious. Normally, fan mail is sent to one's agency and then given to the proper recipient, but this was far too out of the ordinary. Achiko flipped open the envelope flap and reached in to retrieve the thick parchment. It was folded over 3 times and looked be normal ruled notebook paper. Achiko unfolded the letter, and her eyes widened at what was taped to the inside of the letter, which had made it feel thicker than it actually was. It was a series of NDE photos, and if the hair surrounding the VNA was any indication, the woman was blonde. Achiko covered her mouth to keep from giving a scream of shock and outrage. Disregarding the photos, Achiko began to read the letter. It was short, no doubt, letting the pictures speak for themselves. Dear Izuku, my love, I think about you all the time, and from the multiple letters I've sent, I hope you're thinking about me too. I hope you like the new poses I tried. I love you more and more every day. Your love. Achiko looked at the letter, reading it over several times. Her eyes went through the photos before she quickly moved to the bedroom and threw open the door and slapped Izuku with the letter. The green-haired man jumped at the unexpected assault and fell out of bed, landing face down on the carpet before rolling over and looking around. What's going on? He questioned, looking around frantically before having several pictures thrown in his face by Achiko. What are these, Izuku? Izuku looked at her confused before picking up the photos, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head as his face exploded into red. Oh, Achiko, what are these? He asked as Achiko stared at him dumbfounded before clenching her fist. Why, you can't be serious, you're asking me. These are from your fan. She sent them to you along with others, she shouted as Izuku, no longer able to look at the pictures, sat them face down and stood up. I've never seen these or any pictures like these before, Achiko. None of my fans send me stuff like this. Bubble Girl has a pretty strict fan mail policy. There's no way something like this would get past her. Bubble Girl had seen some rather lurid fan mail herself, so she made a point to have all fan mail checked, and these photos would have definitely warranted a conversation between her and himself. Achiko looked at him, and having lived and loved Izuku for several years, she could tell when he was lying, mostly because he was a terrible liar, but still, this was too much. First the pawn thing, and now this. Izuku, are you being honest with me right now? You've never seen letters like these before. If you say yes, I'll believe you. She said, her brown eyes locked with his green ones. Izuku frowned a little at Achiko's words. She had been questioning his honesty a lot recently. Aside from the lie of omission about his quirk, Izuku had never lied to her, especially not about something like this. If he was honest, it really hurt to think the love of his life didn't believe him when he said something to her. Still, he swallowed that pain in order to soothe Achiko's doubts. Achiko, I swear that I haven't gotten any kind of letters like these. You are the woman I want and will always want, he said, stepping towards her and squeezing her tightly in a hug before kissing the top of her head. Achiko stood there for a moment, listening to Izuku's calm heartbeat before wrapping her arms around him as well. I'm sorry I was being stupid. Please forgive me, she said, squeezing tightly and trying to keep her tears from falling. Izuku stroked her back and sighed. It's fine, Achiko, that must have scared you, he said, forgiving her and putting this incident behind him. Unfortunately, he was the only one to do so. That incident festered in the back of Achiko's mind. She couldn't stop thinking about it, and though she wanted to desperately believe him, she just couldn't. Maybe she was paranoid, or maybe she was just so insecure that she couldn't believe that Izuku could be hers and hers alone. And oh, she had to do something about it. She had to put this to bed. If Izuku said that he never received a letter like that, then she would believe him after searching the house to make sure. While Izuku was gone, Achiko began her search, first starting in the most logical places to hide something like behind the furniture, hidden inside a book, or behind a picture frame. After coming up with nothing, she moved to more eccentric places, searching outside the house, thinking it may be buried out there or hidden under some lawn ornament. After spending an hour digging and flipping everything over before replacing it, she came back inside and flopped on the couch covered in sweat. Okay, it wasn't in here or outside, so that means there's nothing to find. Izuku was telling the truth. Achiko sat up, wiping sweat from her brow. So why don't I feel satisfied? Why do I still think that I'm missing something? She asked herself before standing up and turning on the air conditioning. As she did so, she heard fluttering. Achiko cocked her head, listening to the vents as fluttering echoed in them. What is that? She asked, moving from vent to vent before finding the source of the noise. Using her quirk, she floated up to the vent and pressed her ear against it, hearing fluttering paper clear as day. Achiko went and retrieved a screwdriver and took off the face of the vent, and there before her was a cardboard box with a little bit of paper sticking out of it. Achiko hesitantly grabbed hold of the box. Her heart was thundering in her chest as she came to rest on the floor. She bit her lip as she grabbed the lid of the box and slowly took it off. She knew what she expected to see, but it still floored her when she did. The box was full of letters and photos of the same naked woman. She grits her teeth as white-hot rage flowed through her. Izuku had lied to her face with a smile. She was so angry she couldn't stop herself from reaching into the box and ripping apart everything her hands came in contact with until even the box was shredded to pieces. Achiko's eyes were glazed as she recounted the story before speaking to Tsu. I was so angry I couldn't control myself. I couldn't think straight. In hindsight, I should have thought that everything was too convenient. Every time I went looking for something, I found it. I can't help but think I was so stupid. Izuku would never do something like that to me, but I couldn't see it, and Tsu watched as Achiko's eyes swelled with tears until they overflowed. I was so awful to him when he came home that day, she whispered, cupping her mouth before continuing with her story. Achiko sat in the living room for the rest of the day, not even bothering to close the curtains and turn on the lights when it got dark. She eventually heard the front door open and heard Izuku call out. She could hear the worry in his voice. Coming into a dark house and not knowing where your significant other would scare anyone, indicated by the green flashes of light in the hallway showing that Izuku was channeling one for all. She almost scoffed at thinking that. When Izuku had told her about his true power, she thought she was so special that he would trust her with his most closely held secret. I guess he doesn't trust me as much as I thought. Izuku rounded the corner. She watched his eyes scan the room like he was trained to do before noticing her silhouette. Achiko, he said, turning the light on and seeing the ripped-up paper strewn around the room. Still, She remained silent, her brown eyes staring into him as he turned off his quirk. You scared me. What are you doing sitting here in the dark? He asked, closing in on her before sitting next to her on the couch. Her eyes never left him, searching him for something, some indication that she missed, something she should have seen, that would have let her know how much of a liar Izuku was. Disappointedly, she found nothing. She blamed herself that all she could see was the man she fell in love with. How could you do this? She asked, her voice completely flat and lifeless. Izuku cocked his head as if he was confused. Are you mad I was gone so long? I'm sorry, Achiko. I didn't think it would take as long as it did, but I came home as soon as I could, he said, thinking that was the source of her anger. Achiko's eyes darkened at that. Are you still going to play this game, Izuku? Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend you don't know what I'm talking about? She asked, anger starting to bleed into her voice. Izuku, still looking confused, stared at her. Achiko, I don't understand what's going on here. Please just tell me what I did wrong. What did I do to upset you? He asked, placing a hand on her leg, and that physical contact broke Achiko's self-control, and she swung, clocking Izuku in the cheek. Izuku fell back at the strike, looking at Achiko. The dull throbbing in his cheek was nothing compared to the shock he felt at being hit by Achiko. Sure, the two sparred on a regular basis, and he'd been hit by Achiko before, but this was the first time she'd struck him in anger. Achiko stood up and glared down at Izuku as she clenched her fists. Stop lying to me, she shouted finally. I know what you've been doing, Izuku. This whole time you've been lying to me, saying you love me and how happy I make you. They were all lies. You've been cheating on me, she shouted as she grabbed the shreds of paper and threw them at him. I don't understand. I thought we were happy together, but I guess that was just me. I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives together, but I guess that was just my fairy tale, she whispered before glaring at him again. You could have just told me you were unhappy, Izuku. We could have talked about this, and even if we couldn't fix it, we could have ended this on good terms. I cared about you. I want you to be happy even if it's not with me, but this is wrong. You're a BSDRD, Izuku Midoriya, complete garbage to me. I'm leaving, she hissed at him before turning to walk away. Up until that moment, Izuku had simply stared in shock as Achiko ranted at him. His mind was completely stalled until he heard those two words. I'm leaving. Izuku stood up and rushed to Achiko, reaching into his pocket. Achiko, I don't know why you think I cheated on you, but I would never do that. I love you, and I want to be together forever with you too, he shouted, getting in front of her and dropping to a knee before offering her the ring in his hand. I want you to marry me, he whispered. Achiko looked at the desperation in Izuku's eyes, and for the smallest of moments, she wanted to forget everything she said and thought over the last few months and accept his proposal. Maybe they could work things out. Maybe it was just a lapse. She did love him and did want to be with him. She wanted to say yes. Achiko bit her cheek and looked down at Izuku. I never want to see you again. You disgust me, she said, walking past him. Achiko's eyes were continually flowing with tears now as she finished her story. That's the last time I saw Izuku. That look of absolute pain on his face is the last memory I have of him, too. No matter how many times I try to think of the better times we had, all that comes to mind is his face at that moment. I shattered him. Sue, the man I love, lay broken at my feet. I did that, and all because I couldn't take a goddamn moment to think, she shouted, standing up, unable to hold still with so many emotions flowing through her. She began pacing across her living room. I still love Izuku, Sue. I want nothing more than to go to him, say I'm sorry, to beg him to take me back, but I can't. I blamed him for something that wasn't his fault. I said so many hurtful things that I can't look at him and not feel guilty. But worst of all, I can't accept his daughter. I know who her mother is. I know what her mother did to get what she wanted, and even though I know it's not fair, I blame Hinako for this. Sue looked at Achiko and felt her heartache for her friend. She had no idea what Achiko was dealing with. She knew the breakup with Izuku wasn't as pretty as she made it out to be, but she had no idea it was this bad. His daughter is the embodiment of our broken relationship. I can't insert myself back into his life, Sue. I lost at the moment. I lost faith in him. Toga may have loaded the gun that killed our relationship, but I fired the bullets, Achiko said, sitting down on the couch again. Her breathing was heavy, and she had to keep wiping tears from her eyes. As she sat there, Achiko felt Sue move and hug her tightly. "I'm sorry, I didn't see how much pain you were going through. I thought it was better to not ask, but I see that was a mistake. I should have asked sooner," she said, hugging Achiko tightly. Achiko took a deep breath as she finally stopped crying and pulled back from Sue. The frog girl let her go to collect herself as she thought about what Achiko had told her. She had no idea that all this had happened to her best friend. So, Toga was responsible for everything. She asked as Achiko grimaced but nodded. "Yes, she was stalking Izuku and making it look like he was cheating on me, and when I left him she made her move. After we broke up, I moved to Hokkaido to be a hero there. I wanted to get as far away from Izuku as I could," she said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't even know anything had happened until Mina sent me a picture of Izuku and his new daughter. After I saw that, I came back. I was still furious, but I wanted to at least put it all behind me and wish him well with his daughter." Achiko stood outside Izuku's new home. Apparently, he had moved as well. No doubt he and his wife or girlfriend needed a bigger space now that they had a baby. "Maybe I shouldn't do this," she said to herself before slapping her cheeks. "No, I need to face this and move on," she said, knocking on the door. It took far longer than she would expect for Izuku to open the door. When they were together, he was always prompt in answering the door. The door slowly opened, and there stood Izuku. He looked in one word, terrible. There were deep bags under his eyes like he had just stopped sleeping. His clothes were wrinkled, and she could tell he hadn't exercised in a while. In his arms was a small bundle with blonde hair sticking out of it. She looked down at the baby, seeing she was asleep. "Hello," Izuku asked, rubbing his eyes before seeing who was at his door, and his eyes shot open, and he jumped a little, and to Achiko's surprise, Izuku's quirk activated as he stared at her with this intense fear, as if she was a monster at his door ready to attack him. She couldn't fathom what he was doing. Was he that scared of what she had to say that his quirk activated on instinct? "At the time, I thought he was just shocked to see me and thought I was there to beat him up or something, if only that had been the case," Achiko said, sighing as she recalled the terror on Izuku's face and how callous she had felt towards it. "It's just me, your ex Izuku," she said, looking at him as Izuku calmed down and stood up straight. "Sorry, Oki Uraraka," he said, looking at her as he rubbed his eyes. "I thought you were someone else," he said before waving her in. Come in," he said, letting her inside his home. It wasn't as clean as she would expect Izuku and his girlfriend to keep it. She knew Izuku had an intense longing to keep things neat and orderly, bordering on OCD. "Look, I'm not here to fight or anything. I just came by to say congratulations to you and your partner on your first child," she said, looking at Izuku as he began crying. "I'm sorry, Achiko. I thought she was you," Izuku said as he passed her to sit the baby in a bassinet in the corner. The relief on Izuku's face in not having to hold his daughter was disturbing to Achiko. What was wrong with him? Sure, they had never explicitly talked about having kids, but she always knew that Izuku would be an amazing father, but the way he so eagerly put down his daughter, like holding her, physically hurt him. "What are you talking about, Izuku?" Achiko asked, crossing her arms as Izuku ruffled his hair and then began to fiddle with his fingers. She knew all these mannerisms. She'd only seen Izuku get this fidgety right before he told her the secret of his quirk. "Just tell me, Izuku. It's not like we're together anymore," she said as Izuku looked at her with shock. "That's just it. Well, she made me think we were," he said as Achiko sighed, getting a little frustrated. She had no idea what Izuku was talking about. "Who is she?" she asked with more force before Izuku shouted back. "Toga," he shouted as the baby woke up and immediately started crying. Izuku turned his head to look at her, just staring at the crying baby. Achiko stood there silently as she processed what Izuku had told her. "I thought she was you. She made me think we were back together." Achiko slowly walked over to the child until she looked over the railing of the crib and stared at the blonde hair and Izuku's freckles before the baby opened her eyes, and Achiko looked at those golden green eyes. "Toga transformed into me, and you got her, PRGNNE," she asked, slowly turning to Izuku, who was full-on crying as he stared between Achiko and Hinako. "I thought she was you," he whispered. Achiko couldn't stand it anymore as she raced from the house, slamming the door behind her. I didn't stop running for entire city blocks. I couldn't believe what Izuku had told me, but as I ran, so many things started adding up about our breakup, and I knew I couldn't blame Izuku for that. It was all Toga. Well, it was me and Toga. I fell for her trap and gave her what she needed to take Izuku from me. I practically pushed him into her arms. I can't be with him again. Sue, there's too much between us now. Most of it is my guilt at letting this happen. There's nothing there for us, but that doesn't mean it's the same for you, she said, grabbing Sue's hand. The frog hero was startled by Achiko's words. What are you talking about, Achiko? Sue asked, feeling nervous as Achiko shook her head. So you don't have to hide your feelings anymore, she said simply. I know that you liked Izuku too. I know you would never do anything to get in the way of the relationship we had, but that's beyond repair. Now, if you don't still have those feelings for him, forget I said anything. But if you do, don't worry about me. I know I and Izuku are over, and I'm sure he knows that too, she said as Sue blushed at Achiko's words. She wasn't wrong. She did have kind of a crush on Izuku after the USJ incident in high school, but at that point, Izuku and Achiko were an item. She wasn't the type of girl to try and take another's boyfriend, so she stayed a respectful distance away. The feelings had dulled over time, but when she heard that Achiko and Izuku had broken up, she was ashamed to admit that she kind of thought she might have a chance, but the thought of betraying Achiko like that stayed her hand. I don't know, Achiko. Izuku has a lot going on. I don't want to take advantage of that for my own gain. Besides, I don't think Izuku sees me like that anyway, she said as Achiko shook her head. Look, I don't want to pressure you or anything, Sue. Just think about it. Izuku isn't the best at seeing what he wants or, more importantly, what he needs, Achiko said with a sigh before leaning back against the couch. Ugh, I don't think tea is going to cut it, she said, standing up and heading for the fridge to pull out a pair of beers. This is what I need, she said, smiling. Sue looked up at Achiko and gave a weak smile. Her mind was a million miles away. Izuku sat down on Dr. Nabe's couch. So, Izuku, this will be our third session. Now that you've been here a few times, tell me, how do you feel? She asked, looking at Izuku, who in her eyes looked a little better. The bags under his eyes had grown lighter, and his eyes were brighter as well. In her opinion, it was now time to get into the difficult stuff. I do feel somewhat better. Hinako and I have been talking more and spending time together. It's so much better than ever before. Hinako and I actually went out to dinner the other day. It wasn't anything special, but still, the two of us spending time together outside the house. It's more than I could ever have hoped for before, Izuku said with a genuine smile. For so long, he and Hinako had lived in the same house, but it was like two strangers living together. He and Hinako had rarely spoken with each other back then, and when they did, it often turned into an argument. But now they were talking. He was learning about her, and she was learning about him. He had learned that Hinako's favorite color was red. She liked rock music, and her favorite food was carbonara. Where she had eaten that he had no idea. I'm glad to hear that Izuku, you and Hinako have started bonding and are slowly becoming a true father and daughter. Now that you and Hinako have started building a healthy relationship, I think it's time we talk about how another of your relationships started and ended. Izuku cocked his head slightly in confusion, but slowly she saw him put her words together, and the change was immediate. Izuku's eyes grew dark as his pupils shrank to pinpricks, and his breathing shifted, coming out as heavy panting. Izuku's fists clenched on his legs so hard she could hear his knuckles crack. Izuku, take a deep breath and calm down. Breathe with me, she said before taking a breath and holding it for a moment and released it slowly. Izuku stared at her before taking a shuddering breath and holding it and then releasing it slowly. That's good. Come on, a couple more times, she said as the two breathed together until Izuku was able to relax slightly. I know this is incredibly uncomfortable, possibly even frightening, but you need to talk about this. You've come far, but this is necessary, Izuku. You need to talk about this, only then can you move past it, she said, looking at Izuku, who bit his lip before speaking. Okay, where do you want me to start? He asked. Dr. Nabe looked at him and nodded, seeing Izuku now had the will to move forward. Start from the point after Uraraka left you, she said, and saw Izuku flinch at that, but then sighed. I didn't handle it well. were Izuku's first words. Izuku sat on his knees in the hallway as he stared at the front door. Achiko had left hours ago, or maybe it was only a few minutes, he wasn't sure. He hadn't moved from the spot where he'd proposed to her. He could feel the now dried tear tracks on his face. His eyes felt so dry. As Izuku sat on his long, numb knees, something jolted him from his paralyzed state. It was the sound of his phone. A phone call is here. A phone call is here. A phone call is here. Izuku's phone continued to shout All Might's signature ringtone over and over from his pocket. Izuku was on autopilot as he instinctually pulled his phone from his pocket. He accepted the call, but didn't speak. Izuku. Hello, Izuku, are you there? Mirio's voice came from his phone. He just stared at the phone, staying silent. Izuku, if you're there, say something. Mirio shouted. The worry in Mirio's voice was the only thing that got through to Izuku and made him speak. I'm here, Mirio. Izuku's voice felt like sandpaper in his throat and sounded just as rough. Oh good, you scare me there, buddy. Were you still sleeping? Your voice sounds like you were. Mirio asked as Izuku licked his chapped lips. And no, I wasn't asleep, he said, finally beginning to rise, his knees screaming in resistance before eventually popping as he stood to his full height. Look, Mirio, I don't feel all that good. I don't think I can come in, he said, hanging up. The immense guilt he felt at lying to his friend couldn't override the sheer shock and pain of Achiko leaving him. Izuku stood up and put his phone away. He wandered through the house looking at everything he and Achiko had filled it with. This was their house. He looked at the pictures they'd put on the walls, the pieces of furniture they'd picked out. All of this was theirs, but now Achiko was gone. How could this happen? What even happened? I didn't do anything. I told her I didn't cheat on her, and she didn't believe me. He whispered to himself. How could Achiko not believe him when he told her something? He would never lie to her. He loved her with every part of his being, so why? He asked himself again as he lay on the couch. He heard his phone going off in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw it was Mirio calling again. He knew his senior wouldn't stop calling, so, without a second thought, he crushed his phone and dropped it to the floor. Izuku curled up on the couch as he felt his eyes burn with tears building up inside them before running down his face. He cried, lying in the fetal position on the couch. He didn't know how long he cried before falling asleep, but at some point he had. Izuku was torn from his sleep as he heard knocking at the front door. Izuku, it's me. Mirio opened the door. Mirio shouted as Izuku lay there not saying a word and ignoring Mirio's words. There was more knocking on the door as Mirio shouted again. Izuku, open the door if you're in there, he shouted again before going silent. For a moment, Izuku had thought that Mirio had gone until he heard footsteps and then felt someone's presence behind him. Izuku hardly ever let people stand behind him. The life of a hero had robbed him of that ability, but right now, he didn't care if All for One was standing over him right now. Maybe that was for the best. Someone should kill him. The love of his life couldn't trust him, so what was the point? Izuku was torn from his apathy as a hand roughly jerked him up to face a pair of angry blue eyes. Mirio had probably heard from Nijire, who had no doubt heard what Achiko had said about him. Was Mirio here to shout at him too? To tell him how much of a piece of SHD he was for something he hadn't done? Izuku should be furious at that thought, but he had no feeling to give to such an emotion. Mirio stared at Izuku before shouting at him. I've been calling you, why didn't you answer? I was banging on your door, why didn't you open up? I thought something had happened to you. I was worried, man. He shouted, letting go of Izuku, who collapsed bonelessly onto the couch. Mirio just stared at him before sitting heavily on the couch next to him. Tell me what happened with you and Achiko, Mirio said. Hearing her name on someone else's lips brought forth a fresh stream of tears Izuku had thought himself incapable of producing. Mirio turned to Izuku, seeing him crying silently as his eyes stared at nothing. Mirio sighed and sat up straight. Achiko called Nijire, and I heard you two broke up. Izuku looked back at Mirio as something other than despair came into his eyes. Is that all she said? He asked before coughing in his rough voice. Mirio looked at him for a moment. Yes, she just said you two broke up and she couldn't stay here anymore. I'm sure there's a lot more to this than that, and I'd like to hear your side of things if you want. I know breakups aren't easy, Izuku, especially after you've been together for as long as you two have. I want to help if I can, but I can't force you to talk if you don't want to," he said with a shrug before standing up. "Either way, I'm going to get you some water. Your voice sounds terrible," Mirio said before heading into the kitchen. Izuku watched him go as his mind spiraled. Maybe I should tell him. I'm sure Mirio can help me explain this to Achiko and make her believe me. One part of him said, "Oh yeah, it'll be just that easy. Face it, as soon as you tell him what happened, he's going to believe you cheated too. Look at the evidence we're guilty in anyone's eyes." Izuku shook his head. "Besides, do you really want to tell Mirio that Achiko thinks you're cheating on her? How could he even help? Face it, we're screwed 6 ways to Sunday." Izuku clutched his head as Mirio entered the room again. "Here, drink this, and just take your time," he said, sitting the water on the table. Izuku stared at the water glass for a moment, then looked at Mirio. He had to tell him something, but he didn't want to lie to Mirio. "We've been having troubles for some time. Achiko doesn't trust me," he said simply, which was the truth. Strange things had been happening which Achiko had blamed him for, and when he defended himself, she didn't believe him. That thought burned in him. Mirio just looked at him, plainly not expecting more, but willing to listen if there was. "I proposed to her last night, and she said no before breaking up with me. That's what happened, and it hurts," he said, leaning forward and clasping the glass of water. "It hurts." Those words didn't begin to cover the gaping wound in his heart. Izuku started chugging the glass of water. Mirio continued to look at him and nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that, Izuku, I really am. Is there anything I can do to help? Maybe if Nijire talks to her, you two can work this out," he asked. Izuku looked at him and shook his head. "I don't think that'll work. I'll go to Achiko in a few days and see if she'll talk to me. I don't want to give this up unless I absolutely have to," Izuku said, gaining some determination back into his eyes. "I need to make her believe me." "So you still believe that you could save your relationship with Uraraka?" Dr. Nabe asked as Izuku nodded. "I did, or well, I hoped I could. I thought that if I could convince Achiko that I didn't cheat on her, she'd come back, and we could move past this. I was willing to do anything to get her back," Izuku said as Dr. Nabe looked at him. "I understand you wanted to fix your relationship, Izuku, but after all these years, can you see that Achiko was in the wrong?" Dr. Nabe asked, looking at Izuku, who shook his head. "What? No, she was being tricked just like me. It wasn't either of our faults," Izuku clarified as Dr. Nabe tapped her pen. "That's not true, Izuku. Himiko Toga set this all in motion, but she couldn't have without Achiko. You said you and Achiko had dated for years in that time. Did you give her any reason to believe that you would cheat on her?" Izuku thought for a moment before shaking his head. "I mean, not that I can think of, but obviously I did somehow. Why else would Achiko not believe me? Maybe I wasn't as attentive to her, or maybe I made her feel insecure." Dr. Nabe shook her head. "Izuku, if you didn't do anything to make her think that, then Achiko's actions were her own. You're blaming yourself for Achiko jumping to conclusions. It's true that better communication could have avoided this, but the decision was Achiko's and Achiko's alone," she said as she looked at Izuku. He looked guilty still, as if he was still unsure about his part in this. She couldn't make him believe what she said, but she hoped that with time he would come to believe her words. "I don't know, Dr. Nabe. I mean, yes, Achiko's decisions are her own, but I can't help but feel that there was something I could do to stop what happened next," he said, clenching his fist. Dr. Nabe nodded at his words. Izuku was a hero. His mind was geared to try and stop bad things from happening. So when they did, he couldn't help but blame himself. "I understand, Izuku, but just think of what I said here. Please continue with your story," she said as Izuku took a deep breath. This next part was painful to think about, let alone speak on. It was like the memory was covered in razor blades that sliced at his emotions, reducing them to crying shreds. Izuku spent the next week at home lying around and trying in vain not to think about Achiko. She was always on his mind, and the more he thought about her, the more he wanted to see her. He wanted to hear her voice and hold her in his arms. As he fell deeper and deeper into his memories, the look on Achiko's face the last time he saw her tore him from his reverie. Izuku sat up from the couch where he'd spent the last week, only leaving it to go to the bathroom or answer the door for takeout. He needed to see her, talk to her, and try to fix this. He'd told Mirio he would give her a few days, but an entire week had passed already. He needed to do this. Even if Achiko still didn't believe him, he had something to say. He looked towards the kitchen and the trash can filled with takeout and pizza boxes. He growled as he stood up and walked to the bathroom. He looked at his reflection and saw the green stubble slowly taking over his face. He ran his hand over the rough 5 o'clock shadow. He'd never thought about growing facial hair honestly. His father didn't grow any, and neither did All Might, and Achiko had preferred him clean-shaven. He shook his head and grabbed his razor from the cabinet and shaved his face. "Today's the day," he said simply. Izuku exited the house, freshly shaved, and wearing a blue t-shirt and jeans with black sneakers. He began walking down the sidewalk. Sure, he could use float and black WHP to get around, but he wanted to stay grounded both physically and mentally. This wasn't going to be easy, but he needed Achiko to understand, or at the very least hear his side of the story. That was the least she can do, right? Izuku walked completely absorbed in his own thoughts as he rounded the corner and felt someone bump into him. But before he could react to them falling, they latched their arms around his waist and squeezed him tightly. "What dash?" he said, looking down into the teary brown eyes of Achiko Uraraka. "Oka dash." He was about to say before Achiko placed her lips on his fiercely, kissing him. Achiko had never been one to hide her feelings, but public displays of affection were never this passionate. She usually saved this for when they were alone, but all that didn't matter. After a week of not having her next to him, not hearing her voice, or feeling her warmth next to him, he didn't care about anything else. Izuku wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off her feet to return her kiss with just as much passion. They both held the kiss for as long as they could before their lungs screamed for air. Izuku was the first to break the kiss, dragging in fresh air and hearing Achiko panting against his ear. "Achiko, I dash." Once more Achiko interrupted him. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she shouted as he let her down on her feet. He looked at her as she barely held back tears. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. I'm so stupid. You would never cheat on me. I don't know what I was thinking. Please take me back. I know I'm stupid, and I know you're too good for what I've done to you, but please don't leave me," she shouted. Izuku looked at Achiko for a moment. A part of him thought that they should talk about this and really get to the bottom of things. Achiko had said some things that cut far too deeply to just overlook. She didn't trust him, and he should say something about that. She needed to know what she did was wrong. He needed to tell her she was wrong, but the other part just wanted to take her back and forget this ever happened, and that part quickly drowned out everything else. "Of course, Achiko, I love you," he said as he grabbed her hand and smiled. "Let's go home," he said, turning away from her to head back to their house. As Izuku turned away, Achiko opened her eyes, revealing that they weren't her trademark chocolate brown, but instead were bright yellow, and zeroed in on Izuku's back. "Sure thing, Izuku," Himiko Toga shouted excitedly. Dr. Nabe looked at Izuku as he explained his meeting with the disguised Toga. "So, well, that was Toga at that time?" she asked as Izuku nodded. "I didn't know, of course, but I should have later on. I was just so happy to have her back in my life, I didn't think for a second that anything was going on," Izuku said, thinking back to the year he spent with Toga disguised as Achiko. Dr. Nabe raised an eyebrow at Izuku. "You say you should have known it was her, but how could you? Was Toga bad at her deception?" Dr. Nabe was asking this in an effort to have Izuku see that this wasn't his fault, but also to learn more about Himiko Toga. Shoto hadn't gotten back in touch with her on whether she'd be allowed to see her or not. Izuku sighed. No, she played Achiko perfectly. There were only slight things that were off with her. You know, the kind of thing you'd see someone you've known for your entire life and just assume they're acting off or something was wrong. Of course, I didn't know how wrong until it was far, far too late. Izuku walked into the house, and as he turned around, Achiko attacked his mouth again, kicking the door shut behind her as she ravaged his mouth with her own. She was being so aggressive, more so than he'd ever seen her before. But he just assumed that she was desperate and trying to make up for the last time they were together and went along with her longing. After all, this was Achiko. He hadn't seen her in weeks, and he desperately wanted her to be happy with him. He couldn't take her walking out again. Izuku growled against her as he lifted her up, pressing her against the wall of the entryway. Achiko gave a grunt as she detached her mouth from his and tore open his shirt to attack his neck and chest. Their labored breathing echoed throughout the empty as Izuku grabbed hold of Achiko's pants, pulling them down along with her panties as she deftly undid his pants, dropping them to his ankles. "I missed having you inside me, Izuku," she whispered before turning around to face the wall. "Please don't make me wait anymore," she said, looking over her shoulder at Izuku, who moved slowly and grabbed her hips. Achiko, feeling his warm, firm grip on her hips before Izuku entered her. Achiko gave out the sexiest Izuku had ever heard as he hilted himself inside her. He began moving slow, falling into their standard rhythm before Achiko leaned back against him. "Harder," she whispered to him. Izuku looked down at her before thrusting deeper into her. "Harder," Achiko hissed again as Izuku complied, slamming in her harder, their bodies slapping together as each move pressed Achiko against the wall. "Harder," she screamed as Izuku pressed Achiko against the wall, slamming her hard and fast, each move making her hiss, and until Izuku heard a crunch and saw the drywall giving under his fierce passion. Seeing that bought Izuku a precious few seconds to clear his head and realize he wasn't wearing a condom and was on the verge of leaking into Achiko. Izuku began pulling free of Achiko before she placed her hands and feet against the wall and slammed back against him, pinning him to the opposite wall as her walls squeezed him like a vice. This STMLTN was too much as Izuku exploded deep into Achiko's depths. He watched as Achiko shuddered with each burst into her, forcing her into her own orgasm. Izuku watched in shock as Achiko rode out both their climaxes. Izuku's knees gave out as they both fell to the ground. "Oh, Achiko WH, what did you do?" "I wasn't wearing CC condom," he whispered as Achiko turned to face him. "I know," she said with the happiest grin he'd seen on her face since they moved in together. But what if you get PPRPRGNNT? Just saying the word made Izuku feel as if he was having a heart attack. Achiko finally rose off his softened member before sitting back in his lap to face him with that same smile. "I hope I do, Izuku. I want to have your baby," she whispered as she bit his earlobe. Izuku looked at her, his green eyes staring into her brown ones. He would be lying if he said he'd never thought of having children with Achiko. In fact, it was a fervent wish of his once they were married. "Do you not want to have a baby with me, Izuku?" Achiko asked, looking as if she was on the verge of tears. Izuku reacted on instinct and hugged her fiercely. "Of course I do. Nothing would make me happier," he whispered. Izuku shook his head. "I should have seen something was wrong right then. Achiko was never that impulsive. We always talked about having kids, but never really made a concrete plan. And then she just says, yeah, let's have a baby. That should have told me something was wrong, but I couldn't see it, or maybe I just didn't want to," he said, shaking his head. Dr. Nabe looked at Izuku and nodded. "I think that's enough for today. Have Hinako come in after you," she said, wanting to let Izuku breathe and collect himself. This was not something he could just talk about in one sitting, and Dr. Nabe didn't want to push him too far too fast, one step at a time. Dr. Nabe told herself as she watched Izuku walk out the door. Dr. Nabe took this time to put away her notes on Izuku and SWCH over to Hinako's. The girl had come just as far as her father, if not father. Unlike Izuku, Hinako was just now being introduced to this. It hadn't settled into her as deeply as it had Izuku. And for that, she hoped Hinako was thankful. The blonde girl walked in. She too seemed better. She didn't seem so guarded now, or like she was afraid to touch anything in fear of her breaking it. Even the way she was dressed told Dr. Nabe how far she'd come. Gone were the butt shorts and tank tops. Instead, Hinako was dressed in a tight t-shirt and some jeans that hugged her figure in a flattering way instead of pressing against her like a second skin. "Hey, Doc," Hinako said as she sat down as Dr. Nabe nodded. "Hello to you too, Hinako. How have you been?" Dr. Nabe asked. Hinako took a moment to collect her thoughts as she brandished a small smile. "Good, but could be better," she said, tapping her fingers on her legs, a nervous pattern that her father shared. "I'm glad to hear that, Hinako. So what would you like to improve about your life, since you say it could be better? Is there something you'd like to do or have? I know when I was a high school girl, the list of things I wanted was a mile long, 6 feet wide. She said, giving a chuckle as Hinako bit her lip. Dr. Nabe could tell there was something on the young girl's mind, but couldn't tell what. After several moments of silence, Hinako finally spoke. I just want to be a high school girl, Hinako confessed. Dr. Nabe took a moment to think on her words before understanding dawned on her. Oh yes, I remember. You've been homeschooled since sometime in middle school. Hinako nodded at that. Why is that, Hinako? She asked as the young girl took a deep breath. I started acting up around then. It all started when I graduated elementary school. Hinako stood in front of her elementary school with her father as they had their picture taken. Hinako had on a bright smile as she looked up at her dad, who had actually managed to make it to the ceremony. She looked at her dad, and the way his eyes shifted back and forth like he was expecting some monster to jump out at him. She supposed that was just part of being a hero. Hinako and Izuku turned to hear several pairs of feet running up to them. It was some of her classmates. Hey, Hinako want to come and play with us? One girl asked as the others cast glances at Izuku. Can I, Daddy? She asked as Izuku, with a fearful look, went from his daughter to the other girls before going back to his daughter. I don't can dash. Oh, come on, Mr. Deku, it'll be fun. One mother shouted as she and another flanked him on both sides, practically carrying the male to the park. Hinako was playing around with the other girls, just enjoying being out of school. She sat on the swing as she and 2 other girls talked. You know, Hinako, I've never seen your mom. Did she pass? One girl asked with a concerned look on her face. Hinako cocked her head. She knew that past meant dead, but she didn't have an answer. She'd never really thought about her mother. Her dad never brought her up, and she had no memory of her. I don't think so, Hinako responded unsurely. Maybe your dad divorced her. I hear that happened a lot to pro heroes. My mom says she'd marry your dad in a heartbeat. We could be sisters. The other girl said with a laugh, but Hinako barely responded as the thought of her mother swirled in her brain. Why had she never thought about this before? The only thing that came to mind was a memory of her dad saying she was gone. Yeah, I think I'm going to ask my dad about it, she said, hopping off the swing and heading over to her father, who scanned over the playground like a dutiful warden. As she walked up to him, her father's green orbs zeroed in on her like lasers. It was like he was expecting her to explode or something. He always had that look when he first saw her. It was weird. Are you ready to go, Hinako? He asked as Hinako nodded, as Izuku took her hand and the 2 walked away. As they walked home, Hinako gathered the courage to ask her father the question burning in her chest. As the 2 crossed the threshold, it just burst from her mouth like a bullet from a gun. Dad, where's my mom? She asked as Izuku's back stiffened, his entire body going rigid at the question. Izuku turned away from closing the door and looked at her. His eyes were wide and swirling with emotions that young Hinako couldn't understand, but older Hinako remembered as fear, guilt, and anger. She's gone, he said simply as he locked the door and started to walk past her. But that wasn't good enough for Hinako, not this time. A 2-word answer on the whereabouts of the person who brought her into this world wasn't going to cut it. Gone where? She asked as she followed her father into the kitchen, watching him as he began to prepare their dinner. Hinako, your mother is gone, and that's all there is to it. Now go wash up for dinner, he said as Hinako stared at him and stomped her foot. I want to know, she huffed. Izuku looked up at his daughter. Normally Hinako was well-behaved, a little shy at times, but never defiant. This was new. Hinako, don't yell in the house, and go get ready for dinner. We're having yakisoba, Izuku commanded once again as he pulled out several packets of ramen, tossing them into a pot of boiling water. Why won't he just tell me, Dad? I should know she's my mom, she pleaded, walking up to her father, hoping that seeing her beg would make him tell her what she wanted to know. Izuku shook his head. It's better if you don't, Hinako. Your mother is gone, and if there is a god, she'll stay that way forever, Izuku said through gritted teeth. Hinako looked at her father, her golden eyes wide with confusion. The look of anger on her dad's face. She never saw her dad get angry. Disappointed, sure, even annoyed at times, but never angry. That's mean, she shouted, running away with tears in her eyes. Why would her father say something like that? That was her mother, and she had to be special to her father too, right? I just couldn't understand why he would say something like that. Every other kid in my school who had two parents was so in love. I thought that was just the way parents were. So to hear my dad say he hoped my mom was gone forever confused and hurt me. I felt like he was keeping something away from me. I got mad because it felt like he was punishing me and I didn't know what I did wrong. Hinako explained. I'm sure that must have hurt Hinako. Nobody likes to have things kept from them. But now you understand that your father was trying to protect you in his own way, right? Dr. Nabe asked as Hinako nodded. Still, I was so mad and it escalated from there. I would ask and my dad would shut down or just ignore my questions, which only made me madder and madder. That entire summer break felt like just one big argument, and then school came around, and I was still angry with nothing to do with that anger. Back then, my quirk could only control my own BLD, and my dad didn't want me to train with it so people wouldn't think differently about me. Apparently, when my dad was in school, he had a classmate who was judged because he had a villainous quirk. I didn't know my emotions would make my quirk stronger, especially anger. Hinako walked into the classroom dressed in her black skirt and deep green top. She sat at her desk and stared out the window. She'd been in middle school for a week now, and she was still having the same argument with her father. He wouldn't tell her anything, so she'd gone looking. Hinako had scoured her dad's history looking for any clues to who her mother might be. She even went so far as to ask her uncle Tashinori, but even the former #1 hero was at a loss as to who she was, or so he said. She learned that her dad had a steady girlfriend out of high school, the hero Uravity. But Hinako looked nothing like her, and if Uravity was her mother, why wasn't she with her? Hinako pulled out her phone and looked through some old news articles regarding her father from 11 years ago. She was grasping at straws at this point, but it was all she had. As she read through article after article, one caught her eye. Deku captures final league member Himiko Toga. Interested, she read through the article. Apparently, her father had been visiting the hospital and found Himiko Toga there in the process of committing a crime. The article was very vague, and there were hardly any pictures to go with it. As she read, she finally got a picture of this Himiko Toga. It wasn't a current one. It had been taken several years ago during the takedown of Tamura Shigaraki. Hinako gasped as she looked at the picture. The young woman, and it looked like an older version of herself without the freckles. The golden eyes and the fanged teeth all lined up with hers. I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to believe the things they were saying about her. I was sure that it couldn't be that bad. This was my mom, and my dad was a hero. There had to be a mistake or something. There had to be reasons these people were saying these things, and that's when it came to me. My dad must have done this, somehow using his clout to get her arrested. Of course, looking back on it now, I can't help but think I was such a giant idiot. No matter the amount of fame and fortune my dad has, there was no way he would do something like that. Hinako sighed, running a hand through her hair. She was so furious she couldn't think straight. After all this time, he'd been lying to her, and then on top of that, he'd gotten her mother arrested. Hinako grit her teeth as red lines appeared in her yellow irises. As she stared at the phone, her teacher approached. The woman had entered and seen Hinako on her phone. Using phones was prohibited during school hours. Hinako, put your phone away, she said, not wanting to make a scene about it. She understood that kids would be kids. As long as she put it away, she wouldn't say anything. Mrs. Morrow walked to her desk and looked back, seeing Hinako had not put her phone down at all. Hinako, I said put your phone away, she repeated, but Hinako refused to do so. Okay, that is it, young lady. I'm confiscating your phone, Mrs. Morrow said as she walked over to the girl and grabbed her phone. Hinako reacted as her bead-red eyes locked onto Mrs. Morrow. Don't touch me, she shouted. Mrs. Morrow's whole body stopped and spasmed before the fingers on her right hand were all bent backward with a sickening cacophony of crunches. Mrs. Morrow screamed, bringing Hinako back to her senses. She looked at the teacher as she regained control of her body and clutched at her broken fingers. I didn't even know what had happened. I'd never done anything like that with my quirk. Of course, my dad was called, and he was the last person that I wanted to see. He was able to smooth things over, but I was transferred to another school, and we moved into the countryside. I felt like he was ashamed of me, that he just wanted to hide me away like he did my mom, which only made me angrier. Bad news travels fast, so it wasn't long before my classmates figured out why I was transferred and talking SHD. I was already angry, and so I took it out on them, causing trouble and getting into fights. Hinako walked through the halls of her new all-girls school, not making eye contact with anyone. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to talk with these people. Of course, she knew why she was here and why her dad did what he did. But if he had told her about her mother, none of this would have happened. This was all his fault. Hey, isn't that the girl who used her quirk on her teacher? One girl asked, pointing at Hinako. Hinako just shook her head on and walked to her desk, sitting down and ignoring everything that was being said. Yeah, her quirk is BLD control. Can you believe that? Sounds gross. Another girl chimed in, adding to the irritation that Hinako was already feeling. Who the hell were they to judge her quirk? Yep, that's a power a villain has. And she's the daughter of the #1 hero. He must be so embarrassed. Hinako clenched her fist as she let out a slow breath. Yeah, everyone just thinks about how her dad feels and what he must be dealing with, never mind her and how she was feeling. Hinako went through school having to listen to everyone's rumors about her and how her power was so evil. Maybe they're right. I mean, my mom was a villain. Maybe that's who I really am. She thought to herself as she looked at herself in the mirror that night. All right, if that's what they want, that's what I'll be. Of course, I didn't really know what a villain was, or well, I didn't know how bad a villain my mother was. I started acting like a bad girl, trying to live up to what everyone already thought. Hinako said, running a hand through her blonde hair as she thought back on her actions. I was such a beach, she affirmed. Hinako raised her finger as her eyes glowed red. So what was that about my power being gross? She asked as she slowly rotated her finger with one girl's head, turning to the side as tears poured from her eyes. I am sorry, please, I didn't mean it. The girl shouted as Hinako walked up and slapped her. That's right, don't forget it, Beach. She growled before walking away. It didn't take long before my dad just gave up on public school and opted for homeschooling. He cut me off from everything. All I had was an empty house most of the time and him the rest. I felt so isolated and I didn't want to talk to him about it. And I guess he didn't know how to talk with me. So it felt like I had no one. Of course, my dad was there when I got in trouble, but he wasn't there when I needed him, so I got into more trouble. Hinako leaned forward on her knees and wiped her eyes. Now I want to ask him to enroll me back in school, but do I even have the right to ask that? After everything I've done, should he say yes? Hell, I can't say I would say yes. Some scared document. Should I ask, do I even deserve to? She asked, looking up at Dr. Nabe. Dr. Nabe took a moment to look over Hinako and smiled gently. Of course you do, Hinako. You made mistakes when you were younger like we all do, but you realized that what you did was wrong and have made steps to make up for it. Just talk with your father about it, and I'm sure that he will agree and be more than happy to enroll you in school again. Hinako looked at Dr. Nabe and smiled as she wiped her eyes. Thanks, Doc, you really are a top-notch shrink, she said, standing up and stretching. Dr. Nabe stood as well. Thank you, Hinako, I appreciate that. I said it seems like enough for one day. I'll see you and your father next week, she said as the two women shook hands and Hinako left. Dr. Nabe stretched and walked over to her desk. She had a couple of hours before her next appointment, so she would take this time to check her phone for messages and get a bite to eat. As she fished her phone out of her desk and checked it, there were several email alerts and one missed call from Shoto. I wonder what Shoto needs, she asked aloud, ready to call him back before a text came through. I've arranged it all. Meet me tomorrow to see Toga. Dr. Nabe looked at the phone, reading the text over several times before it registered. I'm going to have a session with Himiko Toga, she stated. Thank you for joining us on this journey through what if Deku and Toga had a daughter. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Jojoflow for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you soon in the next video.